to, of course, Alan Adler on today's Truck Tech Truck Talk edition, and I'm sure he's going to have a ton of good stuff for us. We also are going to talk about a lot of the changing conditions for shippers, of course, with the one and only Andrew Lockwood. But first, we have our top story of the day, which goes about bucking the trend here. We're going to have our very own Eric Kulisch talk about a public offering for a company going SPAC in this
economy. It today.
In this economy?
Oh my!
Eric, how are you?
Hey, good morning, Anthony. It was good being on the set last week, but glad to be with you virtually today.
Well, we're glad you made it there back safe and sound, but I'm excited about this news here. So we're talking about a SPAC, something I did not expect to hear so early in January of 2023. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, yeah, I think you guys used to have Alan Adler on a lot talking about SPACs right and left. About a year and a half ago, SPACs were all the rage. These special purpose acquisition companies that are kind of shell companies that list on the stock exchange and then have to go find a target company to merge with, and it's kind of an indirect, quick way to do an IPO. And but this kind of arrangements have really fallen out of favor in the past year for various reasons we can get into. And so the last year, Frieghtos, which is a digital marketplace for ocean air freight mostly and some trucking, connects to shippers with these, back-end connections to get instant quotes, booking of freight, freight management and payment. And so they're trying to digitize the supply chain and booking process, just like you would make a payment or book a ticket on a kayak or some passenger or airline website. And so they need to raise more money, and they decided to go the SPAC route. And yesterday they went live on the NASDAQ. They rang the bell, and now they're officially a publicly listed company.
And looking at the money portion, how much money did they raise? What kind of money are we looking at here? We're looking at like a million, billions.
Well, it seems like they did pretty well. I'm not an expert on these complex financial transactions or these SPACs, but they raised $80 million. They were valued at $500 million when they listed. So the way I think it works is, they have these fundraisers or investors that, become basically the publicly listed company, and they invest in turn in the actual operating company, and then the listed company kind of gets the benefit of the shares. So I think there's some provisions, or the way it's worded, I think there could be, the investors could actually end up giving some more money to Frieghtos, but we're not sure if that will actually transpire. And of course, with a SPAC, there's always the danger that the investors will get cold feet and pull out their investment at the last minute, but it doesn't seem that that's the case here. There's a lockout clause for a couple of years, and these investors seem pretty committed to Frieghtos from everything we can gather.
So, Eric, when I hear SPAC, I think of, wow, that's so 2021. And here we are looking at it again in the beginning of 2023. Is this a dangerous move here for Frieghtos? Is there some upside for them to go about it this way?
Well, that's the thought. It is potentially dangerous, but this deal seems to be a little bit structured a little better. It's got, some of those protection clauses that I mentioned, a lockout, and it's got, some of the investors are actually people that would use the site or have a strategic interest in it, including Qatar Airways is an investor, although I'm not sure they invested in I think they believe they did invest in the SPAC itself. And then you have some other long-term or well-known investors. So, the way Zvi Schreiber, the founder and CEO, described it, in some ways it's better than an IPO, traditional IPO, where you have investors jumping to get the pop in the stock and then, kind of sell off their shares. So, we'll have to see. I mean, some of the risk of these SPACs is that, as I mentioned before, the investors could, think that the target company is valued too highly by the sponsors, and then they try to redeem their investment even before it goes live. So, but that hasn't happened here. So we'll just have to wait and see. But it looks like everybody's pretty. There's been no changes in the investors, and it looks like it's on pretty solid footing. So not every SPAC's the same.
And for those who are just catching up and figuring out what Frieghtos is it like a booking platform, or what are some of the things that made it SPAC worthy?
Yeah, well, it is a multi-party booking platform. So rather, as a freight forwarder, it's got two sides of the coin. There's a web cargo. So if you're an ocean or air carrier, you list your capacity in this multi-party platform. The forwarders can go in there as members and pick a route and instantly compare rates and book something and get an instant booking. So rather than doing it more manually where it might take days, and then you don't even have certainty that the quote lasts for 8 hours or a day, so it changes, right? So you got to go back to your customer back and forth, trying to confirm, hey, is it okay if I commit to this price? All that's pretty much eliminated because it's done quickly. So that increases efficiency. It helps the forwarders make sure they can get capacity when they see it rather than someone else snapping it up. And so they're trying to digitize this space. The ocean carriers have been slower to adopt. And then there's a second website, the Frieghtos website, which is basically where forwarders can put their capacity up or sell their service, and the importers and exporters go and buy or book with the freight forwarder. So that's basically how it works. And I guess it's a pretty much an untapped market. It's low adoption, so a lot of growth. Supply chain is a growing industry, and there just hasn't been as much technology digitization yet. So the investors think that it was a worthy investment.
And Eric, of course, while we have you here, can you tell us real quick about this story around Air France?
Yeah, last night I was about to go to bed to prepare for this show, and we got some news from Air France KLM Group that they're buying 4 additional Airbus A350 freighters. These are large freighters. It's a brand new plane because Airbus has now really had produced production freighters in a while, and so this A350 takes the passenger variant and makes it a freighter. It's a large competitor to Boeing's next generation 777X, and so Air France KLM is going to actually buy 4 of them. Technically, they're going to go to KLM Cargo, and they're going to be flown by Martin Air, which is a Dutch all-cargo carrier that is part of the group, and they fly a few planes, and they're going to actually operate these for KLM, which is phasing out I think both of them are phasing out their older 747s.
Do you think with those 4 freighters going to the Dutch, would they paint any of them and call them the Flying Dutchman?
Good one. Might have to do that. Air France, by the way, they ordered 4 of these planes last year in the first year on the market. So Air France will have 4. It looks like KLM will have 4. The Airbus is, the plane will be produced. The first ones should hit the market in late 2025. The first model will be delivered.
Eric, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Before we let you go, on the terms of SPACs, I know this is maybe a one-off situation, but do you see this really potentially impacting the air cargo industry at all in a significant way in the upcoming year, or do you think this might just be a one-off thing?
Well, it's interesting you asked that. There are a couple other SPACs out there. I mentioned in my story briefly, there's a Turkish airline, cargo airline, not that large, MNG airline. Most people have probably never heard of it. And they signed a deal with a special purpose acquisition company in December to be listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So, again, it's another foreign company, freight transportation, trying to get in on that market. Most of these have been tech companies in the past or other types of companies. So that'll be an interesting one to watch. I think there's a company called Unique Logistics has some SPAC floating out there. I'm not familiar with that yet, but so there's a couple out there to watch. And, overall the market for SPACs is down. So we'll just have to see if that picks up in interest.
Thank you so much, Eric, for coming on the show. We'll definitely be keeping an eye out. And the 3-year wait for the drop on those freighters, I'm going to be keeping an eye on that as well. Do you have a newsletter or anything folks can check out in regarding to additional content?
Yeah, find us on American Shipper or FreightWaves.com. You can find me on Twitter at Eric Reports and on LinkedIn, where I try and post a lot of my stories as well.
Awesome, Eric. Well, I'm sure we'll check in with you again sometime next week. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks.
Right now, we're going to go over to the wall because we have our first carrier update of the morning.
Donnie, you're going to look here, starting off with checking out our overall market, starting with outbound tender volumes and outbound tender rejection index.
Yes, so here in blue, we've got our outbound tender volume. We draw the line at 10,000. We want to be above 10,000, thumbs up. And we've kind of sustained that for a few days. I was kind of wondering, is it going to peak up and drop back down? Because normally you see the beginning of January versus the end of January, a decent little decline in volumes. Mm-hmm. And we've had a decline in volumes, but not as much as what I thought it would have been. It built back up here. Now, of course, we're going to go through the weekend. End of the month is Tuesday. So, yes, it's going to be a busy weekend. And what they can't get moved over the weekend, they're going to try to get, off the decks by Monday or Tuesday because they want to claim as much revenue for January as possible because January is always a tough month.
Yeah.
So we might see these volumes sustain over the weekend and through the beginning of next week. Rejection rates, they haven't gone any further down. They're just kind of staying around that 3.6, 3.8 range. So today we're at 3.78.
Yeah, I mean, and I wouldn't expect them to go much further down. I mean, there's almost this natural floor, and we've talked about it before, right around that 4% range. The only time we've ever seen them, and they weren't even sustained lower, was around that COVID. Yeah. And I mean, those fell sub 2%, but I mean, really, even if you went back to 2018, rejection rates were never really sustained below 4%. I mean, they were at 4%, but not below them like we've been for now.
We dipped down to our lowest point during the shutdown, right before it took off. And I believe you're right, we were right around that 2%.
Yep.
Yes, there are natural things, as in you've got truck contracts, but trucks aren't in place.
Yeah.
And you'll see some of that. Trucks are broke down, you miss the next pickup, it gets declined. And so that's that, 3%. We start getting below 3%, then that's something to really watch. Next chart here, let's take a look at, what's breaking it down by dry van and reefer. The blue line is our OTRI, 3.78%. In red here, we're at 3.5 for dry van. So it's down there. It's getting close. And this is one of our, these are historic lows here, as we said. Reefer here, we see reefer not taking off, but starting to trend back upward here a little bit. We're up to 5.91%. Again, reefer, these are historic lows. But at least we've stopped the decline here a little bit. We're starting to pick back up. Now, come about mid-February, we'll see it normally start to pick back up anyway. So that's where reefer really needs to make it to is mid-February. Once we get closer to the Valentine's Day, and once you get into mid-February, that's when that produce starts to harvest in South America, because a lot closer to the equator, where it's a naturally warm, year-round pretty much. But they'll start to get some harvest in, and those will move up and probably into Miami. And then, so we'll start seeing a little bit of a pickup there. And then, of course, March is produce start coming in through Central and America and Mexico, coming up maybe through Laredo. So we'll start to see this pick up. And that could be a lot of reefer freight. Now, of course, early in the season, they can still use dry vans. And they'll put some of that produce, onions, on flatbeds with sides, of course.
Mm-hmm. Now, my question for you with reefer freight and produce, I mean, I've noticed in the past, we don't see it on the volume side, but we'll see rejections change. I mean, does that have to do with that kind of I know we saw it on like in the van side around the holidays, but that kind of direct to spot, just because it's not consistent freight, it kind of depends on harvesting and when those things hit the actual market.
That's the word that time sensitive comes in. And they know that they'll be willing to pay more for those prices during those little peak seasons. And that's what allows them to bump their rates up. And if there's a claim, it's simply going to be the entire load. So there's a lot more risk when you're hauling produce than versus bags of sand.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Donnie, so much for this update. We'll be sure to check in with you again a little later. Right now, I'll hand it over to Thomas Wasson.
Good morning and happy Friday, everyone. I'm Thomas Wasson. It's time to read the news. Knight-Swift Transportation confirmed the durability of its more diverse business model Thursday after the market closed. The carrier issued full year 2023 adjusted earnings guidance of $4.05 to $4.25 per share, safely above the $4 mark it had previously indicated would be the new trough. As the fourth quarter progressed, it appeared that number may be in jeopardy as trucking markets continued to deteriorate before firming in December. The 2023 expectation was in line with the consensus estimate of $4.14 at the time of the print. In other news, the latest data from the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse reveals that drug use among commercial drivers may be at its highest level since the federal repository was set up in 2019, but more are being cleared to drive again as well. Much of the increase can be attributed to violations related to marijuana, the substance identified most in positive tests. Marijuana violations increased 31.6% in 2022 compared with 2021 to 40,916. That compares to a 5.3% increase between 2020 and 2021. In fact, positive drug tests reported to the clearinghouse in 2022 increased in 12 of 14 substances tracked by the database, with only hydrocodone and heroin showing decreases. Well, in slightly better news, Air France KLM said Friday it will order 4 additional Airbus A350 wide-body freighters from Airbus. The planes will be operated by subsidiary cargo airline Maersk on behalf of Dutch carrier KLM and will replace 4 Boeing 747 cargo jets currently operated by KLM Cargo and Maersk. The planes will be based at Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. I don't speak Dutch, folks, the company said. Deliveries to Air France KLM Maersk are expected in the second half of 2026. Now, you can find details of these stories and a lot more at FreightWaves.com and on our new app. And if you're watching on our YouTube channel, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. For the full FreightWaves TV experience, head on over to tv.freightwaves.com. That's a wrap for the first segment of the news, but don't worry, folks. Don't touch that dial. We have plenty of other content coming up right after the break.
The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
So I found this video earlier today. This is called the Shape-Shifting Robot. This was made by scientists out in China at the University of Hong Kong. And it has the ability to switch from a solid to a liquid state. Now they were inspired by sea cucumbers and octopi. Is that how you say that? Octopi? I think that's correct. The sea cucumber, they were inspired by the sea cucumber because it has an ability to alter its stiffness of their tissues to improve their load capacity, and the octopi because they are able to camouflage and a couple of other attributes that they have. So this is a really cool thing that the scientists have found. Qingfeng Pan, one of the chief engineers on this project, says it endows them with the ability to move with more functionality. And basically, they use the metal called gallium for this. And gallium is a metal that can melt at really low temperatures. You can melt it just by holding it in your hand. And so there are a lot of, and it can reform after being in a little bit cooler temperatures. But they want to be able to use this for both medical purposes and for other purposes, even like electronic assembly. But with medical purposes, it's hard for them to do that because the internal temperature of humans is 98.6, so that causes the gallium to go ahead and melt. So they've got some tweaking that they want to do, maybe combine some other elements to the gallium to make sure that they're able to use this for medical purposes and, like I said, the electronics assembly purposes. Now, switching things up just a little bit, a bear out in Boulder, Colorado has become a wilderness star. Take a look at these pictures. This is from the Boulder Open Space and Mountain Parks Agency. Now, they have cameras set up all throughout the city, and usually these cameras take pictures when they sense motion. So you'll really get usually pictures of animals just walking by, but this bear seemed to be captivated by the camera. It ended up taking more than 400 pictures, just posing for the gram, I guess. But 400 pictures, the bear just constantly, it took, like, I think the camera caught 580 and over 400 were of this single bear. So apparently it was captivated by it, and now it's become a social media star from all of its selfies. You know, when you gotta find the perfect picture, sometimes it takes hundreds of photos to get there. Just ask Kaylee Nix. That's all I have for this edition of the Social Roundabout. Right now I'm gonna toss things over to Anthony Smith and Thomas Wasson.
Thomas, in the words of our chief broadcast engineer, Skynet is finally here.
Well, you know what it looked like on one of those French art projects or something like that for a film school? Honestly, I thought the bear looked like Ron Perlman's. He's doing some headshots again for his next A24 film. So keep an eye out. Stay strong, Ron. You're looking good, buddy.
I love it. Right now, we're going to welcome on Alan Adler for our weekly Truck Tech edition. Alan, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Why am I thinking of that guy from Terminator 2 when I saw that gallium stuff? Is that what you were referring to there, Anthony? I think that's what I'm thinking. I can't remember the actors.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. With Arnold Schwarzenegger, I think.
And the other guy.
The other guy.
He was pretty good, though. I mean, he really melted the audience's heart.
Yeah, well, it took the stab. Anyway, okay, we can move on. Whenever you're ready.
Alan, we're excited to have you on. And of course, this is I think, a pretty interesting Truck Tech edition this week, as it always is. But we're talking about the deliberate edition. Is that right?
Electrification deliberation. I even gave the definition in there. Here's the thing. I told you yesterday, no big essay plan this week. So what we did do is we kind of took a look at some stuff that that Preston Fate, who's the CEO of PACCAR, talked about earlier this week, kind of a little lower in the call, about electrification. And he has been nothing if not consistent over the months and years about where that fits. Now, PACCAR, through all of its brands, has 9 electric trucks in the market that you can buy. None of them are world beaters in terms of range on a single charge and things like that, but they sell chargers with them, and they're there if the customers want them. And Fate's approach to this whole business is, we're going to be a diesel business for a really long time, but we're putting bets on all of these technologies, whether it's battery electric, fuel cell electric, hydrogen and combustion. We're putting bets on all of them so that if one of them emerges, we'll be ready and we can be there. And so I think that was sort of some interesting insights. A couple of analysts asked him, excuse me, about that in different ways. And I thought his answers, while not terribly revealing, definitely were consistent with what he's been saying for a couple of years.
Well, I feel like with the R&D as well, you know, when they're saying they're looking into it, a lot of times these large companies have very functional products. It's just because of safety standards and reputation and whatnot, they're hesitant to do it. Do you think as well, gleaning anything from that earnings call and diversification, did it kind of mirror stuff that like what the Toyota CEO said a few earnings calls back about how it feels like it's a little overhyped right now for electrification in terms of viability? Or is it something where we're still seeing more of a wait and see approach?
Well, I think it's starting, and the wait and see probably is still prevalent among some fleets. They're not ready to get into this yet because they may understand, or they may be getting schooled, if you will, by companies like Volvo, which is way out there. Their numbers yesterday were pretty amazing. It's obviously a nascent business, but you know they're talking. You know, their intake of electric trucks across all of their brands around the world was over 2,000 orders in the fourth quarter. That's pretty impressive when you think about it being electric. However, they are not going to persuade everybody right away. And it's interesting that also in the newsletter, Mark Solomon, our colleague, had an interesting piece yesterday in a use case that is of LTL. How would less than truckload fare with electrification? And the spoiler watch is not very well. And so that piece, I kind of linked to that in the newsletter today because I thought he brought an interesting perspective as well. And then we have a lot of other shorts in there this week. We don't always do that because we try to come with some kind of essay at the top, but a lot of other shorts on orders and things like that are going on. So there is a growing business, both in terms of the trucks and in terms of the infrastructure, the chargers and things like that. Partnerships that are still being formed. Re-Automotive, which we don't talk a lot about. They have a interesting system, electric chassis with, the motors at the four corners of the chassis. They just agreed with Microvast to make Microvast their battery supplier. That's a very big deal for those two companies. It also speaks to another company that, we need to keep an eye on because they're young, they're new, they don't have a ton of money, but they have a very, sort of light manufacturing approach to their business. But they have a really cool technology. So we need to keep an eye on some of these guys. This was a good week in the newsletter to sort of catch up with some of them.
And Alan, what was the story around Penske? They received a few orders.
Yeah, Penske took receipt of two Freightliner custom chassis. Say that very quickly. FCCC chassis that are electrified. This is the MT50E that Freightliner has been working on for a while, and Penske, which is one of the companies that likes to test anything that's out there, they were a partner with Daimler on the original E-Cascadia and EM2 program in California, rolled up over 1 million miles along with NFI Industries in terms of testing the first round of electric trucks. They took delivery of these two MT50Es and promptly gave them out to customers, healthcare customers in California. A couple of weeks ago, they took in two E-Cascadias. These are second generation E-Cascadias that get about 230 miles on expected charge on a single charge. They took those in. And so, Paul Russa, who gave a great presentation, we wrote about it in Truck Tech back in August, using Lego blocks and sort of audience participation in terms of the supply chain around electrification. And, he is a supporter of electrification, but he's also a realist about it. He believes that we have a ways to go. It will go slow until we can get the infrastructure to catch up with the trucks and that sort of thing. And, ultimately there's grid issues that have to get resolved. But he's a realist about it. And so, a fan of the MT50E, at least from his quote in the press release. And, so I think Penske is continuing to bring these vehicles into their fleet, and probably among the leaders in terms of, like I say, testing out different applications, different use cases, because they have a lot of customers with different needs. So I think for them, this is just an example of continuing to, sample the buffet, if you will.
And looking forward, we're seeing a lot of stuff about electrification. Have there been any talk about trying to overcome other hurdles such as environmental, like weather and other things? I know that one thing when I got to ride a Nikola truck, it was very quiet, but all you could hear was a fan. The batteries apparently are like me in my house. They like to be around 72 degrees.
Yeah, there's a cooling system, and it's interesting because as we also get into some of these fuel cell electric vehicles, they have batteries as well, and sometimes they switch back and forth between battery power and running on hydrogen. But your question about the batteries themselves, I mean, I think that we are looking at waiting for, better batteries. I mean, Tesla's talked about this 4680 cell of theirs for forever, and they are producing them. And I think the plan is probably to produce those at this expansion of their gigafactory in Sparks that was, I think Noy Mahoney wrote about earlier this week. And, so better batteries, greater energy density, and things like that. The environmental part, the batteries, Thomas, have a really great secondary use because they only run in a certain range within the batteries themselves. So there's a lot of energy left in them when they're no longer useful for trucking or automotive use. And there's a whole industry built around the idea of secondary use of the batteries.
Alan, before we let you go, of course, there's more information in the actual newsletter. When does that newsletter come out? And do you have any kind of podcast to follow that up with?
Let's see. We have had a good show this week, I thought, with Sam Abu Al-Samid. Next week, we'll be coming to you from Manifest in Las Vegas, and we have our guests will be Mike Placentia from Ryder and Sam Saad from Gaddick. And then we also, hopefully, if we're any good at this video stuff, we may have something from the show itself. So that's coming up next week on Truck Tech on FreightWaves TV. And the podcasts are out there on all the platforms now for the first 3 episodes. So hope people will check that out.
Thank you so much, Alan. I'll put in my petition for South Turk to Vegas. Maybe you can get an Economy Lately edition as well. Got to keep that B-roll, keep it going. Alan, thank you so much. Looking forward to the newsletter.
Could we have South? That'd be awesome if we could get him out there because, you don't want me doing the video.
He'll become West Turk instead of South Turk after we send him there.
Southwest Turk. I like that. That's pretty good.
Awesome, Alan. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you have a great time in Manifest. Right now, we're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.
like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
Hey everybody, this is Thomas Wasson, enterprise trucking carrier expert here at FreightWaves, telling you about my show, Loaded and Rolling. Now, it involves trucking topics for large carriers and even small ones that wish to be large. Anything that impacts trucking, you can get it there. You can catch us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on tv.freightwaves.com. We do it live.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. And Donnie, we left off talking about rejection rates. One way we can look at it, break them down in sonars by length of haul. We've done that here. You've got it across the board, all the lengths of haul, outside of the local length of haul, that city, 100 miles or less, because those rejection rates are effective. They're, 2%. I mean,
2%.
nothing
Sorry
on
about
that gets rejected.
Our regular outbound rejection rate's 3.78%. We got short haul, which is still just right outside the city there, under 250 miles, outside of 100 miles, 3.73%. Mid haul, 250 to 450, 388. Tweener haul, that's an important one. That's a key indicator. Normally it is higher than the others, which it is higher than all the others, but it's so low, it tells us that they're accepting everything. Tweener haul is at 450 to 799 range. And that's one of those ranges that people just really don't want to run a lot of those loads because it takes a day and a half and to run it, maybe 2 days for the delivery. So it's just not the timeliness is just not very good for companies to run those lanes because their trucks are held up.
It's that inefficient length of haul.
Was the word I was looking for. And so typically they'll pay a little bit better sometimes. They'll go to the spot market first. And you'll see here they have the highest rejection rates. This is one that you can always keep an eye on. And it should be higher than all the others. But it is so close right now. I'm not going to say that it's really too much higher. It's 1% above the average. Long haul, 405. Long haul, I was actually surprised to see it 405. Normally it's a lot lower. But right now, those long hauls out to California, we looked at some rates yesterday about going out to California. You're getting that $1.60 to $2 range of going out to California, but the return rates are not what they used to be. So is it worth it now to drive all the way out to LAX to get now $220, $240, $250 loads coming back where it was $350 a month?
Exactly. And that's something to pay attention to. That's why being able to break it down, you can kind of tell, especially when you look in Market Dashboard, because we have that mileage associated with a given lane, you can figure out where it fits in and what's going on in that specific length of haul that can affect prices.
Yes. And so you can do this with volumes as well. This is not always a good one. We've got a minute here left. Let's go to the next chart. All right, so I took our VOTRI and our volumes, drive-in volumes, and I threw them into a regional, because I like to do this every 4 or 5 or 2, 3, 4 weeks, just so we can see what region is operating, quote, the best for a carrier, what I think would be best for a carrier. And what I look for is obviously, this has higher rejection rates, but there's not quite near the volumes. And of course, your population is not near as dense as over here. So you might have quite a bit of deadhead. So number one, I like the Midwest. Obviously, very high volumes and pretty strong on rejection rates. Number two, for drive-in, I like the Southeast. Why?
It's high volume.
Because of those volumes. And right now, it's what we need is volumes. Maybe number three would be the Northeast, but Northeast is difficult to run. Next chart here right quick. I turned on the reefer. I kind of got the same response here. This would be number one for me for reefer, but I think number two, I would have to pick the Northeast. A lot of volumes, really dense population. I know people hate running the Northeast, but this is where you're going to make your best money right now.
Absolutely. Well, Donnie, thank you so much for this update. We'll be sure to check in with you again a little later. Right now, we'll hand it back over to Thomas and Anthony.
Thank you so much for that update. Right now, we're going to welcome on our next guest, and that is Andrew Lockwood, Senior Director over at Sudath Global. Andrew, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
I was glad to be on.
So, Andrew, jumping into it, we're talking about the changing times for shippers, and really, there's a different playbook for them. Is that right?
Completely different playbook, right? And so I'm going to channel my inner football coach here. I almost feel like Oprah saying it's a new supply chain for you and a new supply chain for you. But here's the point: is this is a very different landscape than the landscape we've seen even last year. This time last year, we've gone through this 2.5 years of just pandemic craziness and chaos. I'm looking forward to 2023 because I think it's really a great time, as, you know, from a reset standpoint. But here's my encouragement for shippers watching out there. This is the year to jot down those goals and the year you can actually achieve them. You're not going to be as worried about the chaos this year as you have in years past. I think this is a great opportunity to achieve those supply chain goals of your company, but you've got to have a good plan to do that.
And talking about plans, sticking with the football theme here, shippers have a plethora of new carriers to work with. Are we talking like a Mike Leach air raid style, we're just going to start throwing and see, or are we looking at more of a stay focused, smash mouth style, just run it up the middle?
You know, it depends on what your supply chain needs. I think that's probably the easy answer. You could have the air raid or the option or the up the middle. But here's the thing: is kind of a focus on quality and value is I think the key thing, you know, looking into this year. So again, you know, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, you were just trying to get loads covered. You wanted to get your containers over from Asia. You're trying to get a warehouse just to accept the inventory. Now you can focus on those things of quality. You know, think back to the news cycle 2 years ago. We were hearing about Walmart and on time and full percentages. We haven't heard any of that lately. I think we're going to see a shift back to that now. With parcel carriers, the dynamics changed. Instead of just getting your parcels picked up, now you actually have leverage in, you know, at the negotiation table with both FedEx and UPS. They're in a very different quandary than they were here a year ago. So it's going to bring about, you know, some positions perhaps within your organization that are going to be super important. Your carrier management position, how you're managing those carriers, the metrics you're tracking, what you're holding them to. Now you have that ability to say, hey, I'm not just going to pay you, but I want to see value for what I'm paying you.
And Andrew, with these shifting times, what are your thoughts on how this is going to impact contract rates in the first half of the year?
Contract rates always lag spot rates, right? We've continued to see the contract rates, at least in the truckload side, kind of come down. What's interesting, you know, even with the parcel carriers, right, they still announce a 6.9% GRI on average for the retail rates, but you have a lot more leverage with the carriers all over the map now because everyone's hungry. Volume's kind of inched up, but the number of players that have entered the marketplace in the logistics hemisphere here in the last 2 or 3 years has gone up incredibly. So there is a lot of pricing power from a negotiations standpoint. You have options. I think that's the key thing I want to put out there.
Well, that's what I was thinking. Parcel carriers are still passing on GRI, death by 1,000 tiny fees. I recently did a webinar where I learned about this. There are alternative companies using technology are coming up with other ways to innovate in parcel by having transparent pricing on fees, as well as utilizing the underbelly of airlines. Looking at that, is there a potential for your UPSs and FedExes to get caught flat-footed because they're so focused on their network, they're so focused on I'm the carrier, I'm the pricing power, that they forget that there's disruptors or barbarians at the gate?
That's right. Well, and listen, all empires crumble eventually. We 10 years ago, we thought the Walmart, you know, and it's not that Walmart, the empires crumbled, right? But Amazon kind of came on the scene. We're like, well, what is this new Amazon Prime thing? Here's the point. I'm not sure we've seen the peak yet for UPS and FedEx. Maybe we have. But you look at some of the regional carriers like Lone Star that have entered the marketplace, and they are gobbling up market share from these two, from really the duopoly that we've had in place for a long time. Why is that? I think it's because a lot of folks are tired of just only having two options. There are getting to be more and more pricey options. The service levels have bounced back. We saw that in peak season. There was actually pretty strong service levels. UPS is always going to lead by a few percentage points, followed by FedEx and USPS from a third position standpoint. But people want options. And I think, again, kind of going to the playbook of 2023, you have to take a step back and assess, okay, what do my customers really want? Now I can focus not only on getting the shipment there, but getting it there in a way that my customers desire, or on a specific time, or in a specific manner. And so that's kind of forcing this conversation. And again, that's why we love the U.S. Free market economics, baby. If you have a better mousetrap, you can win. And so I think that's where we're seeing some shift to regionals, to some other, newer players. It'll be interesting to see if that continues throughout the year. I think it personally will.
And Andrew, of course, sticking with that football theme, as shippers look to roots and really make sure they have the best players in the position, what are going to be some of the ideal roles that they need to really kind of hone in on and look at? I know in the past, a lot of shippers really didn't take supply chain or logistics that seriously, but of course, that's changed since COVID. Yeah,
I would encourage everybody right now, take a look around, your boardroom, your table, the folks you're talking with internally. Now, I talked about the carrier management role. That's a huge role, right? That person that is managing those relationships with your truckload, your LTL, your parcel carriers, who has the relationships within your organization, and then are you having active conversations with those players? I know from a 3PL perspective, we need to be bringing a lot more value this year, not just covering shipments, not just receiving pallets in and shipping them out. We need to be focused on the value that we're providing our customers. And I would say from a shipper standpoint, you should expect that from your players in much more than you have the last couple of years. So carrier management position, very important. You need some good bean counters. You need some good business analysts that can slice and dice numbers and really get you up to speed on where your costs are. I think most organizations have an opportunity to actually maybe drive down, do some cost savings from a total logistics standpoint. You may not see that as much on the warehousing front, especially as warehousing costs continue to rise. That space is still somewhat constrained, but especially on the transportation side, I think there's some opportunities to optimize, to look at how you can drive down your spend. On the revenue side, most shippers are, they're trying to test the market and see if they can raise prices with inflation. So I think it actually could be a really good year for companies that are very focused on delivering on the P&L.
It also feels like, given the changes in the freight cycle, we're almost coming around a curve. And any good driver knows that when you don't hit anything, you accelerate at the second half of the curve to get better grip. Looking at that, if I'm a shipper, I'm hearing things about visibility. People telling me about digital twins, real-time analytics with the marketplace. If I'm a shipper and I want to attract better carriers regardless of the market conditions, what are some things internally I need to look at? Is it time to finally catch up to the 21st century, or will my AS400-based system still help me?
I love a good green screen system, but you bring about a good point here. That focus on value translates to technology, and so we think about certain parameters like loads on time and full. Well, how are you tracking that? Is it a phone call that you get at a random time? Are you getting email updates? Can you get better with that, right? The carriers that you're dealing with, the logistics organizations, do they have technology off the shelf that they're bringing to the table? Do they have a portal that you can sign? And these are all questions. Write them down. Ask your providers. If they have a portal that you can track things in real time, perfect. Start doing it. If your carrier doesn't, but they still give you good service, maybe stick with them. But I'm just saying it's time to ask those questions of what is value to you? What is quality? There's a lot of technological offerings, a lot of gadgets out there that you can utilize to get better visibility into your supply chain. Ask the tough questions, go and see what's in the marketplace, and then use the organizations that are investing in those technology advancements.
And of course, Andrew, you're no stranger to FreightWaves airwaves here. If people want to reach out, get more insights from you, how can they do that?
Well, go to LinkedIn, Andrew Lockwood Logistics. I think I'm still the only Andrew Lockwood in logistics, although I found a Nick Lockwood last week. Very interesting. I thought it was only Lockwood, but I digress. So, yeah, find me there. I'd be glad to talk all things logistics. Appreciate you guys having me on.
Awesome, Andrew. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be sure to check in with you again soon. I think there's quite a few Anthony Smiths out there, so you got to kind of have to join.
It's like Highlander. There can only be one.
Exactly. Right now, we're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.
Welcome back to another edition of Check Call, Check Call, Check Call, Check Call. Let's go. Nobody works for free, so why should we be expecting our drivers to? Okay, let's just get it together now. What are some of those proactive steps that you can start taking now? For myself, I would like the Earth to still be here for a little bit longer, but you know, is a hot dog a sandwich?
Oh, okay. Is pizza an open face sandwich? It's bread.
I have been ready for this question. I've seen the show.
We're all in this together.
Thanks for making me hungry. Now I want a hot dog.
You're welcome. Catch episodes of Check Call Tuesdays at 12:30 on FreightWaves TV. Keep up with all things Check Call on freightwaves.com/checkcall. See you on the internet.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation. This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan, and this is Social Roundabout, where we take a look at what's trending on social media. While scrolling this morning, I found this really cool video from some scientists over in China. They've developed this little humanoid robot. It kind of looks like a Lego figure, but if you keep watching, you'll see that it has the ability to turn from a solid state down to a liquid state. Now, this video, this robot was made by some scientists in China, and the lead engineer, Qingfeng Pan, says that the ability to switch from a solid to a liquid state endows them with more functionality. Now, they used or were inspired by sea cucumbers and octopi because of some of the attributes that those two animals have. The sea cucumber, especially because of their stiffness in their tissues, which allows them to improve load capacity and limit physical damage. Now, they want to be able to use some of these robots for electronic assembly and even medical applications, which is really cool. They still have some things to figure out on the medical side of things because this robot is made of gallium, and gallium melts. It can melt if you just hold it in your hand. So for them to be able to use this for medical applications, they would have to figure out a way to keep this from melting when it's used inside somebody's body, because gallium does melt at such a low level of heat, and so that makes it a little bit difficult for them to do anything with this medically. Now, switching things up just a little bit, there's a bear out in Boulder, Colorado that is now a wilderness star. Now, this comes from the Boulder Open Space and Mountain Parks Agency. Now, they have cameras set up all over Boulder, Colorado, and in their parks anyway. And these cameras usually will take pictures when they sense movement. And usually you'll get pictures of animals just walking by, but this bear right here was actually captivated by this camera. The camera had 580 pictures on it, and over 400 of them belonged to this bear right here. He looked like he got pretty good at taking selfies. Look at the angle on like he got his head down, like trying to stare at the camera. It's impressive. But sometimes when you got to get that right picture, sometimes it takes hundreds of photos just to get there. That's all I have for this edition of the Social Roundabout. Right now, I'm going to toss things back over to Anthony and Thomas. They're going to be telling us what's coming up here in just a few weeks for our global supply chain.
Thank you so much, Isaiah. That bear definitely looks pretty snazzy. A Yogi Bear of the future, I guess. Who knows?
Yeah, and you know what? Speaking about the future of supply chain, this isn't the future of supply chain event, but if you want to know about the future of supply chain, get registered for Global Supply Chain Week, which will be covering every single aspect within logistics if you're involved with it in any way.
It's a 4-day-long virtual event from February 20th through the 24th. Recommend everybody check it out just because, we were talking about how things were messed up. Now we can talk about how things may be getting better. So you're going to have the whole experience of the roller coaster, folks, with some of our experts, as well as there are gifts, or what are they, door prizes? How do you do a virtual door prize?
So it's a giveaway, but all you have to do is get registered. And of course, registration is free, and you will be eligible for a giveaway every single day. And of course, it's a great networking opportunity. But you can get registered right now in between this market update and our upcoming break. And when we come back, we'll see who's updated here.
We may have more bears as well. Stay tuned. I feel like FreightWaves needs a scroll like Futurama.
To an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
It's a good day coming.
Welcome back, everybody, to the second hour here on this wonderful Friday for FreightWaves Now. I'm Thomas Wasson, and it's time to read the news. The latest data from the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse reveals that drug use among commercial drivers may be at its highest level since the federal repository was set up in 2019, but more are being cleared to drive again as well. Much of the increase can be attributed to violations related to marijuana, the substance identified most in positive tests. Marijuana violations increased 31.6% in 2022 compared with 2021. That compares to a 5.3% increase between 2020 and 2021. Well, in fact, positive drug tests reported into the clearinghouse in 2022 increased in 12 of 14 substances tracked by the database, with only hydrocodone and heroin showing decreases. In other news, Air France/KLM, they're two separate companies, folks, said on Friday it will order 4 additional A350 wide-body freighters from Airbus. The planes will be operated by subsidiary cargo airline Martinair on behalf of Dutch carrier KLM and will replace 4 Boeing 747 cargo jets currently operated by KLM Cargo and Martinair. The planes will be based out of Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. The company said, and deliveries to Air France KLM Martinair are expected in the second half of 2026. And finally, Alan Adler reports that electric vehicle adoptions might be much harder in the LTL universe than in the truckload space. Citing a lack of robust infrastructure and recharging time, Adler adds that the barriers to electric vehicles in LTL are much more constrictive since LTL carriers operate vehicles in both local pickup and delivery and over-the-road services. Adler cites Charlie Prickett, president and COO of LTL giant AAA Cooper Transportation, who said to FreightWaves in an email that if LTL trucks were limited to 400-mile trips, followed by 6 to 7 hours of recharge idle time, the economic leverage of asset utilization and transit speed could be negatively impacted. Just kidding, we have another story as well. American Airlines reported during the latest earnings call that cargo revenue fell at a greater clip than the rest of 2022, but yields remained well above the pre-pandemic baseline, and the company still generated the second best annual cargo sales in its history. The Fort Worth, Texas carrier reported $263 million in cargo revenue for the first 3 months of the year, a 23% drop from 2021 market high as the year-long slowdown in business accelerated. The results were 22% better than in 2019, at least. For the full year, American reported $1.23 million in cargo revenue, down 6.2% from 2021, but still 42.5% above 2019. Who likes ketchup? I do. Kraft Heinz Company is hosting its annual campaign to find its next 12 drivers for the Wienermobile. Got that one wrong, it's hot dogs. The effort looked for talented public relations managers who can handle the famous vehicle. Can you handle the Wienermobile? Although you don't need to be a truck driver or hold a CDL to get behind the wheel of the Wienermobile, its unique build, 24 foot long and 11 foot tall, requires some skill in the seat. Oscar Mayer, we're going to have to kick it to a break. That's it for your look at the headlines.
Welcome in to this carrier update, Donnie. Gonna take a look here. How did change from, we've talked about it both on a market level and a region level, kind of starting here, how to change it within Sonar.
Yeah, so the last map I had pulled up, we had reefer and drive-in pulled up by regions with their volumes and their rejection rates. Well, if you simply go back and hit your map layers, right here on your map layers, where you enter in your indexes, well, up here above, you can change between regions, states. You know, I know for each, you can't go to all of them for each of these indices, but it'll give you the options and try. For rejection rates and volumes, I can either click regions, which I was just on, and now click back to markets.
Yep.
So I'm going to keep my reefer rejection rates up there. I'm going to keep my reefer volumes in. I'm going to click on markets, and we'll go to the next chart, which would pop up. And now I'm back to the same map that I had that was regional, and now, of course, it has my markets pulled up there. And then I can break it down by markets. I like looking at all of it for different reasons, as you can see why.
Yeah, and now I'm going to call out a couple of markets because we've talked about how you want it. The Midwest was kind of that where you would want to keep your trucks on the reefer side, you look at Indianapolis with a lot of volume. Rejection rates are up, indicated in that darker blue shade. I mean, it's not the darkest that we see up there in North Dakota, but there's not a whole lot of volume up there. I mean, you look at Indianapolis, it's one of your favorite markets, or so you've said. It looks pretty good right now.
Yeah, and actually, we're going to look at that one on our lanes today, just for curiosity, because there is a lot of reefer volume coming out of there. So are you willing to take the risk to go up there? You can make a few phone calls and see if you can find some freight.
Yep.
And we'll see. So one of the reasons that obviously these are darker shades up in here is the further you get away from that Chicago, the main areas where these freight are, the less dense the freight is. You can get up there, you can get stuck, plus the weather right now.
Yeah.
That can get you hung up there. But as you can see, you can see there's a lot of, this might be the majority of it that's holding that Midwest up. But the Southeast being number 2, you still got that Atlanta, and you got some blues in South Carolina and Arkansas. But these are decisions you have to look at both the maps and make your own decisions.
Yeah.
Do you look in here? No, it might be the Midwest is a great region, but you need to be either Indianapolis, maybe Chicago for the volumes, or along this western border here to where you're going to find a lot of that poultry.
Yeah, because, I mean, you look down in the Southeast, you got really 2 options, right? You've got Atlanta or you got Lakeland. And that's about your only 2 options. And rejection rates in both markets aren't great right now. They're pretty low.
And you don't go to Lakeland unless you're really getting paid.
Yep.
You can get volume out of there, sure, but it's going to be very cheap, or deadhead back up to Atlanta.
Really Atlanta, yeah.
All right, next chart here. We'll bounce in here and look at contracted rates versus our spot rates. So I've got our spot rates pulled up here minus fuel. So currently it's $1.82. It has continuously gone down since the first of the year, and we expect this to continue to drop. But comparing to our contracted rates, dry van is still at $2.59, reefer is still at $2.40. Reefer's picking up, dry van is still kind of going down, leveling out right now, kind of steady, but this is continuing to go up. At one point, these will cross back over, and that's where we're getting back to the way things were before COVID. That'll be interesting to see. Does it happen in February or early March?
Absolutely. Well, Donnie, thank you so much for this update. We'll be sure to check in with you again a little later. Right now, we'll hand it back over to Thomas and Anthony.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for that update. We'll check in with you again. Right now, we're going to welcome on our next guest because we have Rush Feldhacker here from Metafora, and he joins us to talk about selling in a deflationary market. Rush, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning to you as well. And Rush, of course, we're seeing it everywhere on the headlines that there is just a shift, and not just the macroeconomy, but also in the freight world as well over the last few months. What are going to be some of the top items that we need to look at first?
So right now we're hearing from a lot of our customers that selling is really challenging in this market. Volumes are down, revenue per load and margin per load are down. So people are investing in sales, and it's creating a lot of noise out there, and customers are kind of tuning it out. Capacity is abundant, so they don't need new transportation service providers like they did 18 months ago. And so what we're telling people is that they need to focus on being different in 3 areas. The first is that your effort's going to have to be different. So conversion rates are a lot lower. It's going to take a lot more input to get the same output. The second is your messaging. The generic approach of, hey, Mr. Customer, this is Rush with Metafora. Let me tell you about our service offerings. We'd like to be a valuable resource for you. That's not going to be working anymore. You need to be very targeted about your approach, and you need to understand who you are as a company and sell to your specific competitive advantages. And then last is your approach. So I'm a big pick up the phone and dial person, but the phones are being bombarded. That's what I'm hearing from shippers. So get good at email campaigns, get good at LinkedIn automation. We need to think outside of the box in this current environment.
And talking about a go-to-market strategy as well, it feels like given, post-COVID, pre-COVID, are there any specific things as we're coming out of this and returning to normalization that some folks, either shippers or brands, can do to set themselves apart?
I think it comes down to understanding who you are as a company and then making a go-to-market approach around that. So who do we target becomes really important. If we're a $100 million cradle to grave brokerage, we don't need to be calling on the largest shippers in America, and they're not going to be able to buy as well. We don't need to be wasting sales resources there. Look at geographies. Is there an imbalance in your network where you're going to be able to buy better than your competitors are? So, say you have a large imbalance and you're moving 300 loads a day from Atlanta to Dallas and maybe 50 loads a day out of Dallas. Let's target Dallas. And our message here needs to be, hey, Mr. Customer, we can move your Dallas to Atlanta $200 below market. Does that interest you? Also think about the industry verticals that you're having success in, where you have really good customer relationships. Can you get referrals from your current customers to other customers in that industry? Can you get a testimonial from a well-known customer and go to market with that to the same industry? So it's just all about being more strategic right now. The shotgun spray and pray approach isn't going to work as well.
And I think that's a great messaging there, because there's so much that has just changed. We talk about this all the time, not just in the last 10 years of selling, but really in the last few quarters or months here. We're looking at really creating that strategy and really honing in. What are going to be some of the biggest things that we have to look at when we're looking about prospecting?
Yeah, I think it comes down to making sure you know what your target market is. And having a reason to call them. I think there's like two different types of sales reps. Really, you have like your analytical sales rep that's really strategic in who you call, and then you have more of like your hustle creative sales rep that just has a lot of inputs and plays the numbers game. I think right now you have to be both to have success. So like defining for your company, if you're in a leadership position, defining for your company, what revenue ranges should we be playing around in? What mode should we be playing around in? And then, using something like Sonar to see where tender rejections are high, like what areas of the country do customers need help in targeting those?
And for those who still have accounts, especially, I remember when I was a broker, when you go in a down market cycle, you get a lot of pressure from customers pushing down on rate. And pricing is not the be-all, end-all now. What are some tips that you can do to convince customers to say, hey, I understand you're getting offers $200 below mine, but here's some service, here's some other data to try and keep me on this lane as an incumbent versus it just going straight out to bid again?
Yeah, it's really strange when prices in this industry get high, customers don't care as much because they're worried about getting capacity. And so when the lane costs $4,000, the customers get us a truck, price really doesn't matter that much. But when the lane drops to $2,000, it's, can you get to $1,950? So yeah, right now, price is very important. Everyone's budget was blown out of the water last year. So they're really trying to dial that back in now. But I think it goes back to defining who you are as a company. What strategic advantages do you have? Do you have a customer portal where the customer can get quotes on full truckload shipments and then book from the portal? If so, go to market with that. Hey, Mr. Customer, don't you hate having to go out and get a bunch of different quotes for one shipment? We might be a little bit more expensive, but there's a huge time savings here. And maybe it's that you have live tracking on all of your loads. Find a customer base where that's really important. Maybe an industry where visibility is king, and try to sell to that. So you really need to understand what your competitive advantages are, and if you don't have any, let's take some time to develop those.
I think that's very well put, Rush. And one of the big things, of course, that my heart goes out to is those sales folks in a deflationary market, because it's that much more difficult. Do you have any advice for, maybe pod leaders, managers, executive leadership on really being able to partner and really coach up some of their sales team? Because I know a lot of folks, low man on the totem pole, are just really feeling the pressure right now, trying to hit their quotas, hit their KPIs. Any tips around that?
Yeah, so I'll do from a manager perspective, and then I'll do from a macro perspective, from a company ownership perspective. From a pod leader manager's perspective, go through your employees' pipelines and see who they're calling on. You're going to be shocked they're calling on the wrong people, and help them with their lead list. Because We talked about conversion rate is already very low. If they're calling on the wrong people, I mean, it's just going to be impossible, and it's really going to hurt morale. And I think it's also setting expectations. When we're in a period of an inflationary market and customers need help and they're adding new transportation service providers, maybe you can add 5 to 6 new customers a month. That's not the normal right now. So let's reset and re-level what expectations are so that your entire sales force doesn't feel like they're doing a bad job. The market is playing a role there. And then from like a macro level, this doesn't help right now, but the time to really invest in sales is when things are good. So 2 years ago, we should have been boosting up sales teams and getting all the new logo acquisition possible, knowing that winter was coming and it's going to be more challenging now. And then hopefully those new logo relationships you landed back then, you've built really good rapport with and are able to keep volume somewhat steady because of that. If you are using this season to really think that sales is gonna go well, that's not the case.
And thinking about like what makes a good sales rep, I've seen it many times where you get a hungry customer rep, they land a big account, and then they just stay. They don't keep prospecting. For folks who are either just going in or even with a book of business, is that something what are some of your advice to them, especially in this down market cycle? Should you still be hitting the gas or should you be circling the wagons?
You need to hit the gas because your numbers are lower. It's just you're not going to have the same amount of success. And I think what you referenced there is complacency that you sometimes see. So a lot of companies think, my best sellers will always be my best sellers. But what we see time and time again is somebody's your best seller until they reach a point where financially they're pretty happy and they start to focus on kind of quality of life and their effort will drop down. You need to always be focusing on developing the next best sellers for your organization. Because that complacency will definitely seep in over time, unfortunately.
Amazing insights today, Rush. Thank you so much for joining us. If people want to reach out to you specifically or find out more about Metafora, how can they do that?
Yeah, check us out at metafora.com or shoot me an email at rfeldhacker@metafora.net.
Awesome, Rush. Well, thank you so much for being on, and we'll check in with you again soon.
All right, thank you.
Right now, we're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.
The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest freight tech news at FreightWaves.com.
what does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation, inflation, inflation. This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
Thomas, it's Friday. You know what that means?
I'm ready.
Another episode of Economy Lately.
Yes.
Let's
Good production value as well. Let's go.
Yeah. Hey, Freddie Fish, are we rolling? Yeah. Okay. Hey,
no.
Anthony.
5 tanks.
What?
5 tanks.
And what? We got it. What were you just doing?
Selling some tanks.
What? So, like fish tanks?
No. Just south. I'm handling business. All right.
Okay. All right. Sorry. Well, we gotta do the thing.
Pay for these lights here. You know.
Yeah. Well.
Oh, that's right. We're recording.
Yeah.
This is the Economy Lately. I'm Anthony Smith, Chief Economist here at FreightWaves, and I'm joined by our buddy here, South Turk.
Yeah, hey, how's it going?
And this is going to be one heck of a show because there's so many updates that we didn't get to cover last week that we have to get to today.
Yeah. All right. Well, as I say, let's dive into it.
And the first update that we have to talk about is retail sales. This got updated last week, and we saw that there was a downward movement of 1.1%. Not too many surprises here. When we look at retail sales, it still remains up 6% for the year, and I have to note that this report is not adjusted for inflation. But within retail sales, we saw some downward movement in vehicles and gas stations. And I don't think it's too much of a surprise because we saw those downward movements in the same kind of categories in the most recent CPI report, but we are starting to see some potential upward movement again in gas prices and, of course, south, those eggs.
The eggs, yeah. I was meaning to ask you.
Yeah, they're getting pricey.
Yeah, I know. I just bought about 18 roosters, so.
You're getting into the money-making business, so are you going to rent the roosters out to a few hens or something like that?
No, I've just been eating them. Instead of eating eggs for breakfast every morning, I've just been eating
roosters?
Yeah, eating roosters, yeah. Not rooster back the truck up, by the way. I haven't eaten him.
Okay, I was getting concerned.
We're not cannibals here.
Okay.
Wait, is Thomas Wasson on today's FreightWaves? Never mind. Don't worry about it. Keep going.
So we also have other updates other than retail sales. We also have an update around industrial production. So the latest industrial production report, we see that there was another downward movement here as well. Now down 0.7% for the month, still up 1.6% for the year. But even though this is a much more upstream report, there were some downstream impacts when we look at durable good production for those consumers. We saw that there was a downward movement for that segment of 1.4%, and that's going to be a little bit telling because we're seeing that there is some slightly easing trends going on upstream as well as downstream. The next update we have to talk about is going to be housing starts, and this one is indeed interesting. So looking at overall housing starts, we see that the updates show that there was down 1.4% for the month and down 21.8% for the year. Single-family housing starts are going to be a weak point once again in the upcoming year of 2023. There might be some slightly stronger trends for multifam, but that has yet to be seen just yet. But really what we're seeing right now is that there was, of course, a significant pull forward in housing activity throughout 2022, and a lot of those homes have yet still to be built. And so we're seeing permit activity also coming down as well. Usually an indicator that there's going to be some future activity or contraction, and we're seeing that there's some downward movement in permit activity. So showing that there's going to be fewer homes being authorized most likely or constructed. But the big thing is that there was a large amount of homes that were pulled forward and being purchased. And so they have not yet been started just yet. But what we are seeing is that there's still an overwhelming backlog of homes that have yet to be built. So when we're looking at homes that are under construction or homes that have been authorized but not started, those are still at record highs. And so we're still going to see some flatbed volumes for this segment as those homes continue to get those construction trends ramped up here. Another update that we have to talk about real quick, initial jobs claims. This just got updated now in the 180,000 mark, which is definitely very impressive and something that you definitely want to see in the economy, that there's a strong labor market, but I'm not hanging my hat on this one. I don't even wear hats, South.
Yeah, exactly.
But if I did, I wouldn't hang it on this one. And this is just because this segment can shift quickly. And of course, we've all heard the news of all the layoffs in Silicon Valley and all these high-tech companies. And there's going to be some type of impact, of course, economically here. And this is definitely something that we spoke about many months ago. But really, these folks are usually very well paid. And when you see folks like this lose their job, it's going to be harder for them and some of these macroeconomic environments to find another role that would pay similarly.
So you're saying like these high-end tech executives might have to end up like working at like McDonald's or something? Or oh wait, no, all those jobs have been replaced by the AI they created. Where do people like that fit in today's world?
They will have to find some type of management role, and that's what they do. They can really kind of create value out of thin air. And I think that's really what was done throughout the pandemic, was value being created out of the thin air. And then that kind of led into inflation, because it was like, oh, value. But their value was fake, South. It was fake. And no one wants to talk about it. But we're talking about it now here. And there's another thing that we have to talk about, South. There's a release that came out, of course, GDP.
Oh, yeah. You know me.
You know me.
Yeah,
GDP, you know me. This is a segment that I think that we'll have to probably just save for another show, because it's a big report and there's going to be a few different standouts in this overall breakout here. So we did see that there was an upward movement for the fourth quarter, showing that there was over a 2% gain for the year. So definitely good news overall, but I'm not really counting on the GDP, because last time when we had back-to-back months of decline in the GDP, everyone said it wasn't a recession. So now I'm thinking, what's a recession? Now, if people don't want to use GDP as a recession indicator, plus this is FreightWaves, so you can have a macro recession without the freight recession. You can have a freight recession without the macro recession, but really it looks like we're going to have a little bit of both.
Wait, are we in a recession or not? I keep ping-ponging around.
Yeah, I'm going to go with yes, but going into 2023. But the other big thing is that there's going to be a lot of folks that say no because of all the other indicators. So I'm not sure what the common indicator to look at for is going to be indicating recession that a lot of people are going to agree on. It used to be GDP, but I don't know if that's going to be it anymore moving forward. But we can just call it like we see it. And right now, I'm calling a very weak consumer going into the remaining of 2023. Maybe they start picking back up into the latter half of the year.
A weak consumer. So as long as, like, if they went more to like Gold's Gym or something, they might.
The consumers have to start lifting. That's a whole nother conversation, Sal. The U.S. consumer probably should get back in the gym. I know I need to get back in the gym. And no one talks about health and fitness. This is a huge thing. We used to go to the gym back in the day. PE, physical education. I don't know if they still teach that in schools or if you can just kind of do that virtually, but that needs to be a thing.
How old are you again?
That's going to do it for this episode of Economy Lately. We have tons more content coming out throughout the rest of the year, I hope, or else they find us and try to cancel us.
Yeah. And also, viewers, write in to FreightWaves, 405 Cherry Street.
Should we tell them that?
Yeah, sure. They can find it online and share your opinions on if we're in a recession or not.
Oh, yeah, make a comment down on the YouTube page.
We're only taking snail mail.
Oh, snail mail, sorry.
Yeah.
No comments, but we'll see you all on the next episode.
When guests come to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
It's a good day coming.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation, inflation, inflation. This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
FreightWaves Now, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan. This is Social Roundabout, where we take a look at what's trending on social media. And we've been shown time and time again, don't make robots with AI, and don't make robots that can shapeshift. Terminator 2 showed us all about that. But apparently, some scientists in China didn't get the message. They created this little guy right here. And they were inspired by sea cucumbers and octopi to build this shape-shifting robot. Now, they chose sea cucumbers because they can alter stiffness of their tissues to improve load capacity and limit physical damage. But this shape-shifting robot has the ability to change from a solid state to a liquid state. You can see him escaping the cage right here. Now, one of the lead engineers on this project, Qingfeng Pan from the University of Hong Kong, said that being able to change from a solid to a liquid state endows them with more functionality. Now, they are wanting to use these type of robots potentially in the distant future for electronic assembly and potentially some medical applications. Now, on the medical side of things, that's going to take a little bit more figuring out because this little robot here is made with what's called gallium, and gallium melts at a very low heat temperature. It can melt just by holding, you can melt it just by holding it in your hand. So you can't really use something like that in medical applications because it would melt in the person's body if they were using it to, they said that they've done some tests where they've tried to deliver and take things out of a person's stomach, but you can't really do that because the internal temperature of a human would melt that gallium. So that's all I have on that story. I want to toss things over and switch it up a little bit to the bear that is now a wilderness star out in Boulder, Colorado. Now take a look at some of these pictures. Now, these cameras that the Boulder Open Space and Mountain Parks Agency has out in Boulder, Colorado usually take pictures when they sense motion. And so you'll usually get pictures of animals that are just moving by, so it's not anything like this where it looks like a bear is taking a selfie. Now, this camera had over 580 pictures on it, and over 400 of them were of this bear. I mean, look at that pose right there. He or she knows exactly what she's doing. I mean, just absolutely stunning. Keep doing your thing, bear. I mean, I wish I could pose like that and, go viral on social media, but hey, I'm not as good looking as the bear, I guess. That's all I have for this edition of the Social Roundabout. Right now, I'm gonna toss things back over to Tony and Donnie for our next carrier update.
Welcome into this final carrier update of the week. And Donnie, lanes of the day. We talked about it. Looking at the Midwest, it is relatively strong, especially on the reefer side. We're going to start here with the lane making sure that reefer is turned on from Chicago up to Fargo.
I'm going to turn my reefer on. I'm going to test this Fargo, North Dakota theory. You know, I was never scared to run anywhere, and why not give it a try? But hey, back then, we didn't have market dashboard. So we can throw these lanes in here right quick first and then see what the rates pop out here. And then you can test if you can find the freight out there. But if you're pulling out of Chicago, it's a pretty good haul. I'm up about 650 miles. Bring it to Fargo, North Dakota, and we're looking at around $3.63 a mile. For considering what's going on right now, this is a really strong rate. The highest has been at least since August here. Here we had peaked up here last week to 390, but still at 363. Confidence score of 3. We still got rates that are hitting $4 a mile. Yeah. So if you call in and pick this up, maybe get the phone call same day. Hey, you want me to go pick up now? Then you can hit that $4 mark or maybe even a little bit higher. Yeah. So taking off and going to Fargo, North Dakota, turn it around. Coming back, you're still at 359. So you got a good overall average. You know, here the high on this is 390. So you could average anywhere from $3.50 to $4 a mile on this lane. Now, there is a lot of weather that can happen between Chicago and Fargo, North Dakota. So you need to pay attention to the weather reports with Kaylee. You do not want to pick up and get caught in a storm and then get stuck for 2 or 3 days. That's going to kill every bit of profit you had. All of a sudden, you're losing a ton of money, and of course, you have to finish the delivery, so you're not going to get out of it. Yep. So, could be a good lane, could be something to flirt with. There are carriers. I know when they used to work with that these are the lanes they specialize in. Yeah. Anywhere from the Midwest back up to South. They were based out of South Dakota and ran all the way up to the Canadian line. All right, next lane here. In Indianapolis, we saw it popping up. You talked about it. You said, hey, Donnie, I'm not going to do Indianapolis to Green Bay. I've got enough, but I'm going to keep the reefer on, and we're going to go down to Atlanta. 385 per mile. Still a pretty strong lane with rates popping up to as high as $4.06 a mile. So again, watch these maps like we show, and you can go in and find these markets like Indianapolis. Maybe accept as much freight as you can in Indianapolis, and then try to run spot rates out coming back or going to different markets here. So hit the double arrows there and let's turn it around. If you want to go back from Atlanta to Indianapolis, it drops down to 275, but still a good average. And 275 right now, considering the market conditions, you're above the NTI. You're still in good shape.
Yeah, and Atlanta's been one of those ones. It's kind of in this tricky market because the market and spot rates have followed. I mean, seeing 275 out of Atlanta to me it's pretty healthy when you look at some of the other options that you would have running out of that same market.
Sure, it can be a lot lower. We'll try to get one more in here right quick. Starting out here in Los Angeles, heading up to Salt Lake City, just because I saw the Twin Falls. It's still at 323. It's come down quite a bit. It was over 450, but 323, this could be a tough run because of the fuel prices.
And then you factor in there's no volatility in it.
Yep, and it's almost 700 miles. Swap it around though, come back out of Salt Lake City, it's still at 330. This is normally quite lower in a normal market, so you might be able to handle that, but it's going to be tough because of the fuel prices you're going to pay and the weather.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Donnie, for the updates this week. We'll be sure to check in with you again next week. Right now, we'll hand it over to Bill Priestley with today's Roundtable.
The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
Priestley here with you, and of course we had the big split earlier this week. Maersk and MSC decided that they're going to forego their alliances, and also we've got more interesting news to talk about in terms of Russia, the price cap, the vessel issues there as well. And we've got two people who can definitely talk with expert knowledge of this situation. Greg Miller joins us, our senior writer from FreightWaves, and also Dr. Sal Mercogliano, frequent contributor, associate professor of history at Campbell University. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us for today's roundtable. Maersk and MSC split up. Greg, this, I think people maybe saw this coming, but maybe not necessarily right now. Some people have said not necessarily a big deal. Some people say big deal. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, well, there were analysts like Lars Jensen that were talking about this last October. So, people did see coming. And if you look at the way MSC has behaved over the last couple of years, it has acquired 271 ships since August 2020. It has by far the biggest new build order book on order. So it looked like, from the outside looking in, that it was preparing to go on its own. And the two companies really have different strategies. So it's not something that was that much of a surprise, but it is a big deal, especially from the point of view of these two carriers, because in 2 years, they're going to have to completely reconfigure their major east-west trades, Asia, US, Asia, Europe. So for them, it's a lot of questions. It's going to be a big deal, and for their customers as well.
Sal, we had an interesting segment, a hot seat that we recorded on Tuesday, and you accurately predicted less than 24 hours later that you were going to see a split between these two, and lo and behold, 18 hours later, it happened. First off, thanks for being Nostradamus. Secondly, what's your take on the split?
I think the split is really indicative of issues that Greg talked about. I mean, Maersk is looking to become a transportation company from door to door. I mean, they want to be the e-commerce, the Amazon. MSC, on the other hand, wants to be the shipping company, and that's what you see them doing. They're buying ships like crazy. I think it's indicative that just before COVID hit, the Maersk S-Class, which at one time was one of the biggest ships out there, over 20 years old now, but they had scrapped one of those vessels, but now 5 of them have been sold to MSC. They're divesting themselves of that fleet. MSC is buying them. Maersk is getting rid of them. And you're definitely seeing a different strategy. I think Greg makes the other great point, too, is that how does this realign? Remember, this isn't taking effect till 2025. Mm-hmm. These are two companies that had 35% of the market share out there in moving containers. And the danger was they were going to get so big that there was an issue with cartels and alliances getting too big. They would get investigations. But now they got to start placing themselves. And now becomes the big moves behind the scenes. We just saw Maersk announce today they're consolidating all their sublines into Maersk. They're going to be making moves against Zim and who knows what other companies in the Alliance and Ocean Alliance. But there's going to be a lot of plays watching here about how this lays out over the next couple of years. This is going to be a long process to see where it finally resolves.
Yeah, so how does that landscape change here, Greg? You wrote another article after that first initial announcement was made. Does this really change the landscape in terms of maritime shipping? And also, we had Lauren Began on yesterday to talk about this, and she said this wasn't necessarily a huge thing, but over the fact that alliances could be rearranged in some way, shape, or form. How does this change the landscape?
Yeah, I mean, for MSC, the general consensus is that when their new builds are delivered, they are going to be big enough to maintain their network.
Yeah.
For Maersk, there's another question there. It's unlikely that that's the case. They don't have a big order book. Most of the ships they have on order are either to replace older vessels or to switch to methanol fuel. So they're going to have a lot of work to do. And one idea is that they don't really need to be in another alliance. They can simply focus on the lanes that they do best, and then do vessel sharing agreements with other carriers in other regions to fill that out, and they can do slot chartering in other areas to fill that out. It's very difficult. There could be this reshuffling, but it's really complicated when you think about how that's going to work. The other alliances, the 2M alliance was between two relatively equal partnered carriers, Maersk and MSC. There's no one else that's that close to the size of Maersk, so it's hard to figure out how that would work. The next largest would be CMA CGM, France, and Maersk and CMA CGM have worked in the past before, so that's a possibility. But CMA CGM is in the Ocean Alliance, so that would cause problems there. And then the next largest behind CMA CGM is COSCO, and that just sort of seems unlikely. If Maersk is not a good fit with MSC, then why would it be a good fit with COSCO?
Right.
So there's a lot of questions on how that's going to work, but the big thing that probably listeners here want to talk about is how is that going to affect shippers?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get to that
there.
in just a second. Sal, let me switch gears just a little bit in terms of talking about Russia. This was supposed to be a big deal, the price cap, the vessel, the insurance, all of those issues. Given what has happened since early January and obviously also early December, what's your take on what's going on right now with Russian oil and how it's being shipped and how the world is reacting to it as well?
Well, I mean, the next big kind of shoe to drop here is going to be February 5th with the EU sanction against the import of Russian diesel. And what we're seeing right now is Europe is gobbling up diesel on the world market in a way we hadn't seen before. They're pulling it from the US, they're pulling it from the Mideast, they're pulling it from a lot of countries around the world, which is going to have an impact. We're going to see reductions in diesel supply in the northeast part of the United States as it's pulled out to move over there. We're going to see escalation in price probably. At that time, this is going to be a big reshuffling. And we just saw the EU putting $100 price cap on the diesel, on Russian oil. What we're seeing, obviously, and we've seen it reported over and over again, is Russian oil is going to countries other than the EU, other than sanctions. It's being refined and being shipped back. So we're in this big kind of circular movement where oil is being moved a longer distance, the ton miles are increasing, but we're not seeing a reduction. But come February 5th, we're going to see another change here because this diesel is going to have a big impact. Fortunately, we've had a warm winter. I don't know if it's global warming or what, but it's been a mitigation against a lot of things that we potentially saw. We've seen LNG prices come down in terms of charters. And we haven't quite seen the spike yet in tankers. Greg's great piece talking about the start of 2023. We haven't seen a lot of what we expected to see yet. But again, you get a cold February and all of a sudden demand goes up and we see China reopening. That can have an impact, obviously, on the cost of fuels and charters across the world.
Yeah, Greg, what are you seeing with regards to the Russian issue, if you will, in terms of how they're promoting their oil? And again, it's basically going through one extra step to try and get their oil refined and then out to the market.
Well, I mean, the December 5th deadline for the crude oil, that's been working fine. The Russian crude is actually continuing to flow. What was going to the EU before is mainly going to India now. So the world is not short of oil and the price of oil has not increased. At the same time, Russia is being forced to take a discount on its oil. Russian Urals is right now around 46. They had budgeted for 70. It's a 43% discount to Brent. So they are having to take a discount on their crude, but it is flowing on tankers to places like India, to places like China. So it's working. The problem, and there are enough tankers. The problem with February 5th, the cap is going to be set at 100, which is fairly high. So theoretically, that diesel should find buyers. The Russian diesel should find buyers in places like South America. There's a bigger question as to whether there's going to be enough tankers to continue to allow Russian diesel to flow, unlike on the crude case. And if that's the situation, then Russia would refine less and send more crude out, send less diesel out, and then there'd be more competition in the world market for diesel. And since diesel is a global market, that's going to increase the price of diesel for consumers in the United States. So to be determined, but that's the different situation.
Going back to what the shippers are saying, I want to throw up a chart here. This is the inbound ocean tenders that basically all ships headed towards the United States. There you see kind of about 2/3 of the way back the famous falling off of a cliff that we had, and then the eventual roll, if you will, out towards today where we had basically had a continuous decline. Sal, right now, obviously with the economy the way it is, how do you see the fare of ocean shipping right now, especially with regard to rates?
Well, I mean, I think we've seen the rates stabilize, come back up a little bit. So we've kind of plateaued out to where we are. Again, you come off that cliff and you're eventually going to hit bottom, and that's what we saw happen. You have the issue here. Again, I think one of the big issues that's happening below the radar that we're not talking about near enough is the new requirements on fuel that are forcing ships to slow down and monitor their fuel, start taking their report cards on what they're doing, which is going to require a little bit more capacity out there than what you've seen in the past. And I think the new order book for containers demonstrates a resizing of the fleet. You're going to get rid of a lot of smaller vessels. You're going to consolidate into larger vessels. Just looked at the Port of Savannah, for example, over the past 5 years, and the number of port calls into the Port of Savannah are down, but the size of the cargo coming into Savannah has increased tremendously. And I think that's what we're starting to see, this efficiency going in. It raises the question about MSC buying so many vessels, whether MSC is doing the right strategy and MSC is waiting, and versus Maersk waiting it out to right-size their fleet.
Let me catch you up there, just because we've only got about a minute left. Greg, your impressions of obviously that chart and where you see the world in terms of the shipper in looking at their rates that they're going to have to pay.
Yeah, well, obviously, the next big, shoot or drop will be the contract rates, which are going to be renegotiated in the spring. So, the carriers are still making tons and tons of money because a lot of these contracts have been renegotiated, mid-contract, but a lot of them haven't. And so there's going to be a big step down, come the spring. And that's where the carriers are still going to make a lot of money in the fourth quarter and the first quarter and even the second quarter. It's really later in the year when the shippers are going to get a lot of relief. And going quickly to Maersk, to MSC, the comment about them, buying a lot of ships. The good thing there is they can just they can sell them for scrap, whereas people that chartered in ships are stuck in contracts. So, they probably bought them with cash, and if they don't need them, they'll sell them.
All right. Well, gentlemen, we're going to have to hold it there, but it's going to be interesting to see how things work out, like you say, over the course of the next few months as these new shoes drop, if you will. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, let's go back over for our last check of headlines with Thomas Wasson.
Happy Friday, everyone, and it's time for our final look of the headlines. Alan Adler reports that electric vehicle adoption might be much harder in the LTL universe than in the truckload sphere. Citing a lack of robust infrastructure and recharging time, Adler adds that barriers to EVs in LTL are much more constrictive, since LTL carriers operate vehicles in both local pickup and delivery on over-the-road services. Adler cites Charlie Prickett, President and COO of LTL giant AAA Cooper Transportation, who said to FreightWaves in an email that if LTL trucks were limited to 400-mile trips, followed by 6 to 7 hours of recharge idle time, the economic leverage of asset utilization and transit speed could be negatively impacted. And American Airlines reported during its latest earnings call that cargo revenue fell at a greater clip than in the rest of 2022, but yields remained well above the pre-pandemic baseline, and the company still generated the second best annual cargo sales in its history. The Fort Worth, Texas carrier reported $263 million in cargo revenue for the final 3 months of the year, a 23% drop from 2021 market high as the years-long slowdown in business accelerated. The results were 22% better than in 2019. For the full year, American reported $1.23 million in cargo revenue, down 6.2% from 2021, but 42.5% above 2019. Now, you can find these details and more on FreightWaves.com, but unfortunately, folks, I got to toss it back over to Anthony for our final little bit before the show ends.
Thomas, for those headlines updates. I was hoping you were able to get to that Oscar Mayer story one more time, but that's going to do for this show. Stick with us. We have plenty more content coming up throughout the day. In just about an hour, we have What the Truck, and we'll catch you on Monday. See you soon.
on FreightWaves TV. Keep up with all things check call on freightwaves.com/checkcall.